Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Tom Lohman. I'm the director and CEO of the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and I'm delighted that tonight, once again, program that's timely and significant in oh so many ways, with our great friends across town at Community College and our partners here at 600 Main Street, the Amistad Center. Tonight's lecture, other people will be introducing our panelists, but we not only have the Dean of Trinity College, Bishop John Selders, but also Professor Devarian Baldwin, who is the Paul Razor Professor of American Studies at the university. It's wonderful to have you with us tonight. I understand that sponsored in part by the Joseph Cornell Fund Museum, the great surrealist artist Joseph Cornell's family foundation created a programmatic support fund many years ago that fuels a lot of our ability to bring people together to create convenings like this that we all learn from. A word about the museum. The museum has been open to the public to general admission since Labor Day weekend. And I am so happy that we've been able to host hundreds of people each weekend. We've been open to noon to 5. And soon we hope to expand our Friday night hours till 8 o'clock. So right now it's noon to 5, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And coming soon, noon to 8 on Fridays, because all of us have straight jobs and we want to bring our kids out in the evening time as part of the great cultural life of our city. So more details for that on our website. You can also make advanced reservations, which is a real help for contact tracing. Masks are required, but everything's free for the duration. Also, there are specialized tours that happen throughout the week on the days in which we are not open to general admission. Again, information for that on our website. And there's a burgeoning catalog of digital content that we've been creating steadily since about April time. Both some staff reflections on art, our Sculpture in the City program, and some of our newest features include virtual tours of some of the larger spaces here at the museum, complete with all the audio guide and wall labels as if you were visiting in person. So come on down and see us or catch us on any of our social media handles. We're live at the Wadsworth on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I think I've done all the housekeeping. I think that allowed us to get another 12 people in out of the waiting room. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jana Israels, our head of adult and public programs. Jana.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. I am Jana Israel, the Adult and Academic Programs Manager at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and I'm glad you're all here. I want to quickly mention that tonight's program was thought of in conjunction with an exhibition that recently opened at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, Protest and Promise, with selections from the Contemporary Art Collection that go back to 1963 until today. So please come by and see this exhibition, which does intersect with some of the themes that we'll address tonight. While protests this year against the brutality and injustices towards Black people in the US have inspired calls for change and meaningful dialogue, the protests have also spawned rhetoric diminishing and even criminalizing the organization of dissent and objection to racist policies, practices, and punishments. Tonight's program tries to give both responses some historical context with a focus on moments when activists against racial violence and injustice began to augment written protests through direct intervention by using their bodies as agents of protest and testimony. We are fortunate to have Professor Devarian Baldwin and Bishop John Selders here to offer their thoughts about how protest has shaped the Black experience and how visual documentation has shaped protest. Devarian Baldwin is the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies at Trinity College. His work examines urbanism through the lens of the African diaspora. He is the author of several publications, including Chicago's New Negroes, Modernity, the Great Migration, and Black Urban Life. Professor Baldwin is currently writing In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, for which he was awarded a Logan Nonfiction Writing Fellowship from the Carey Institute for the Global Good. I should add that that book is actually complete, and it will come out in March of 2021, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. We're also joined by Bishop John Selders, who is Dean of Students at Trinity College. Before his current appointment, Bishop Selders was a chaplain in the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life at Trinity College. Selders is an educator with years of experience in the social service sector. A fierce advocate for people living with HIV and AIDS, Bishop Selders has served as the program director of the Northside AIDS Outreach Project in St. Louis. As a national organizer for racial justice and a frequent speaker about the subject, Bishop Selders often delivers eloquent lectures about the critical differences between the law and ethics to ground his work with communities and students that advocate for the eradication of that divide. So thank you both to both Bishop Selders and Professor Baldwin for joining us.
All righty, thank you, Jana, and hello, everybody. I'm often uncomfortable with introductions. People start reading the bios and stuff they find out about me, and I wonder who in the world are they talking about? Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, they're talking about me. Wow, it always seems very much larger than who I see myself being and living in the world. But I'm very, very happy to be in this space and engage in this particular dialogue with my friend, my brother, and my colleague, Professor Devarian Baldwin at Trinity College. You will find during the course of this next little bit of time, we are buddies. And so we have a familiarity with one another that I hope reads through and shines through. When we talk for a long time, and then we just put a pause on it and we get back to it again. What we thought we would do is have a conversation about protests and really root ourselves in a discussion of what has commonly been known as the golden era, the civil rights movement here in the United States, and particularly in the South, and use images that will allow us to focus in on not only the particular incident that we will be covering, but also the era, the times, and then use these images as a throughway, if you will, a bridge to other both commonly held opinions, thoughts, and ideas, and maybe even talk about what they represent, not only in time, but in space and in culture. All right. So understanding from the very beginnings, pre the United States of America, protest has been used. I often say the Boston Tea Party was not about a tea and a party, was it? It was actually what the young people call a turn up. It was a protest, and it was done where property was destroyed. The tea was opened in the boxes, and the conversation was about taxation without representation. That's the beginnings and the foundings of this nation and this country. So protest has existed from the very beginnings of our time together here in the sojourn of this United States of America. However, I want to say for many of us, we would read this picture and know what we were looking at. And in fact, we know somebody who's in this picture. The late Congressman John Lewis led this march. This is Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1963. Some of us are now renaming this bridge. I know it hasn't officially been done, but this is the John Lewis bridge, not that other guy's bridge any longer. And now he has joined our ancestors. And it was that day that shifted something in this country, a mere protest, or in fact, this was just a march from Selma, Alabama, 50 some odd miles to the state capital of Montgomery, Alabama. This was to be a protest around the voting and the rights and privileges of African Americans in the South in Alabama, but all across the South in the country, in fact. And so there's Congressman Lewis there, having taken a pretty significant thrashing there by the police. One of the things that will be a common theme, and then I'm going to hand it off to Professor Baldwin. One of the common themes here is that these pictures were taken in these are action photos, if you will, but they were taken for the purposes of documenting this moment. They were asking questions about what we say to us. What might what we do today be spoken of by our sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandsons? They were asking questions about how would this be remembered? And I think there's something to that is very different than maybe how pictures of protests are taken today. And we'll get back to that theme. This idea, and we'll talk more about this, but this I believe is something that repeats itself and is in conversation with itself. And we'll talk more about how and why I have made that statement. Professor Baldwin?
Hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good evening. And I just want to say really quickly that it's always a pleasure to be with my brother, my comrade, and my friend, Bishop Selders. And I want to also thank Jana and Tom for helping to convene this. And it's always great to see old friends like Ann Rice in the building, and then former students like Natalie Tanaka and colleagues like Alex Manovitz in the building. So I just want to shout out everybody that's out there to say hello, welcome. I'm happy to be here with my brother, Bishop Selders. So to continue the conversation and pick it up, to take the baton, if we move forward one slide, we're going to marinate on this slide for a little bit and do a close reading and talk about some convening points that can bring us all together for why we're here. Another subtitle for this conversation could be thought of as picturing freedom. So what is the role? What is the role of pictures in crafting freedom claims and the self-conscious display of Black bodies as part of a freedom claim that goes beyond but goes beyond the actual march, the placement, the thought, the contrivance, the intentionality, as moving beyond something as being fake, but being intentional and being controlled and being equally as importantly a part of the freedom claim. So here on October 28th, 1968, more than 300 Black high school students descended on downtown Chicago Civic Center in the shadow of one of just two public Picasso sculptures in the US that you can see in the background to bring the art piece, to read the art read the Wadsworth. Let's talk about art. But they were there to make their own kind of art, these students. So 6 marchers in hooded robes led a funeral procession carrying a long Black cardboard coffin marked with the label Board of Education to the board's office at LaSalle Street. According to the Chicago Defender, others followed behind chanting freedom and Black power slogans. The procession eventually headed back to the plaza where students joined hands to form a large circle while reciting a revised version of the Pledge of Allegiance, that revision always going on that Professor Selders talked about, that revision of the Tea Party. So as the coup de grace, 2 students rushed forward from the crowd while others cheered and tore the cardboard box apart. Local media dismissed the display as an excuse for school truancy. Some even called it anarchy in the same way that we see today with people calling the rebellions senseless, thoughtless riots. But like now, back then, this dramatic staging of a funeral procession was so much more than a chance to skip school. Masakwa Myers, who I spoke to last year, 2 years ago, was a 15-year-old sophomore in high school during this time who helped organize this dramatic display. those in the funeral procession were part of the third week of what they called Boycott Mondays. And that's important in this moment because we have the Connecticut convener with Bishop Selders of Moral Mondays that comes from Reverend Barber. So there's a feedback loop here. The claims that were being made by Bishop and Reverend today circle back to the moral components of King and then go forward a couple years to this very local articulation of a Boycott Monday. So this is the third week in this image. This is the third week of Boycott Mondays, where as many as 35,000, let me say that again, as many as 35,000 Black students and faculty marched, walked out, or pulled alarms. There goes that senseless violence again, right? Pulled alarms to protest what they deemed as failing schools, calling for Black coursework, teachers, and greater community control of school policy. The students were intentional in the contrivance of this funeral display. Myers told me, quote, "We had to remind them of death," end quote. She said the funeral evoked a metaphorical death to the Board of Education and also suggested that the board was already dead because it didn't serve the needs of the Black community. And many of the leaders of this event were also, the young people, they were also artists. So the center of their politics was the artistic practice of what Myers described as creating stunts. It's amazing that actually these stunts mirrored what was happening across the Atlantic amongst French artists and activists of what they called the creation of situations the same year. The production of moments that would disrupt the taken for granted operation of power in the mode of what we call normalcy. These situations would later drive the political intellectual movement of the Situationist International. So it's amazing that without any direct cross-fertilization, Black youth in Chicago were doing similar things. As Myers said, quote, "We wanted to create an amazing, different, exciting circumstance or situation because we believed people could feel and not only hear our grievances through creative expression." So today, Bishop Selders and I want to highlight the deep degree to which this theatrical display before you was not new in the broad legacy of Black freedom movements, and it would be repeated in the present. So we convene here to think about together about the intentionality and dare we say contrivance as not bad words or signifiers of fake, but what does it mean to think about the visual theatricality of contrivance as sitting at the center of not only Black social protests, but also the white supremacy to which it responds? So if we look at that image of the coffin from 1968, and then we go back here to 1925, here we have Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association's Black Cross Nurses. This as well becomes a moment of theatrical contrivance that speaks, that's a feedback loop to 1968. Here we have Black diasporic militarism at the backdrop of World War I. Here is a moment where Black folk are saying, in the world, the white world is creating this League of Nations, and we are on the outside sitting in. We are colonial subjects. We are second-class citizens. So we will create our own nation. We will dress in our own uniforms. We will decorate Marcus Garvey as the potentate president of the future Republic of Africa. And we, in a Victorian fashion, we will create this women's auxiliary of militarized women in military display as the correlative to white nationalism on the world scale. If you will exclude us from that theatrical display of nationalism, that contrivance of nations, which was not real, but which was more of an ambition in the world was coming out of empires, trying to remake and refashion, to rethink people and spaces into nations. If that is the project of the modern world, we will do the same thing in our own way. This here in this image is this powerful way in which we were repositioning Black women's bodies at the center of discussion as the center of the nation. Now, in ways it was limiting because Black women were seen as the child bearers, as the nurturers, as the culture bearers in a separate sphere of the nation, but it's a reassertion of Black women in a dressed up, militarized different way that's responding to other contrived images. So that image of Black Cross nurses is in some ways a response to Black women hanging from trees. we usually only think of lynching as a fear of Black masculinity. This image proves the lie to that claim. So when we see this image, we can think about the Gothic horror song of Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. This is our inheritance. This is Black blood that nurtures the pastoral South, the beauty, the rolling hills, the magnolia juleps, the smell, the polite Southern drawl of Southern hospitality is all fertilized in Black blood. And so the Black Cross nurses serve as a response to the Gothic horror. If you're all watching Lovecraft Country right now, the beautiful remixing of the horror genre into racial terror, that comes from this tradition. The Gothic horror of Billie Holiday speaking to Black bodies swinging as strange fruit. To incorporate this notion of contrivance, here's another lynching image, but it identifies something even more profound. That the reason why we're even familiar or aware of lynching in these photos is because these were postcards. So talking about contrivance is not just about Black riotous irrationality, but it's about the normal functionings of white supremacy in its most mundane ways. So this is a contrivance on multiple levels. So number one, we know about these because these were postcards that were sent around because individuals went to these events, these lynchings, as forms of public amusement, like going to Six Flags or Disneyland. And I'm not being trite in saying that these people went to these events as a public display of how to act, how to be, and where to be. This was a public amusement. And then the postcard was sent around to say, look, I was there that night. And then to add insult to injury, the testicles and the knuckles that were burned at the stake after lynching were put in storefront windows to be sold for commerce and trade. So this notion of contrivance and imagery and picturing Black freedom is in conversation with the contrivance and the picturing of white supremacy. The idea of a contrived terror responds through a contrived expression of Black possibility, a Black rethinking of current conditions through the impossible and the surreal fortune. So we go forward to next slide. So here, if we think about these photos, we think about photography as the modern form. It's the 1920s correlative of today's camera phone. So in the same way that we have the technology that becomes a manifestation of terror, we find Black people all over the world today trying to use the camera phone to recraft the same images, the same terror, the same usages of body to reconstruct these bodies, to offer a different script, a hidden transcript, bring to the surface through the technologies that had once been used for our terror and our suppression, to think about them, to remix them into articulations of possibility and freedom. And that's what we have here. So the camera with the lens as serving as like a specter on a gun being pointed at Black bodies, we have here being pointed back at white supremacy, a remastering and remixing of the technology for a different intent. And so today's use of the camera phone as a contrapunctal remixing of the technology of terror is not new. We have this same kind of manifestation at every moment of technological terror. As an expression of white supremacy, Black possibility responds with something different and something new. So I will leave us there. We can go forward with Bishop Selders going forward in the Black freedom movement.
So we wanted to juxtapose. So we have Black bodies swinging on poplar trees, right? This, Dr. Baldwin just lifted this in a brilliant way. This conversation that's in conversation with white supremacy. Here, the picture of James Mars, who was a Connecticut enslaved person from Canaan, Connecticut. He has a fascinating story. He wrote a book all right? And in his writing of his book, the name of the book, I love the name, The Life of James Mars. And in the writing of the book, he wrote the book, it is said, to remember that Connecticut was also a state that employed African slavery. I want to have you sit with that for a minute, because we like to think that Connecticut was not the South. New England is not the South. All right. So the South had all those bad people here. We were abolitionists, and yet what was invoked in our brand of enslaving Africans was what you see on the back of this man. In the book Beloved, Setha refers to this image as, I have trees. She was talking to Paul D. And so she says, I have trees on my back. Again, making the connection to lynching. All right, this is not a new thing. Keep going, Janet. Keep going, Janet. I chose this picture to characterize Ferguson. First of all, some of you don't know, many of you may who know me know that I was born in St. Louis. And I grew up in the town just west of Ferguson, Kinloch. Kinloch is the first African-American town incorporated in the state of Missouri. I know Ferguson well because it was a sundown town when I was coming along, all right? And so this image, this is from the early days of the rebellion in Ferguson. Remember August 9th, 2014, young man was shot and killed, Mike Brown. He was shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer, Darren Wilson. And this was the immediate aftermath. This young man, Edward Crawford, with this this is one of a couple of iconic pictures that say that look at the t-shirt. He has a canister in his hand that was delivered to the group of quote protesters, those young people who had occupied the streets in a comment because they were reacting and actually just overwhelmed by what had occurred. I got asked several times in the early days, what happened in Ferguson? That it turned into a turn up. And I often say that Ferguson was in relationship and in a conversation with the Dred Scott decision. See, Dred Scott was from St. Louis. Dred and Harriet Scott, y'all forget her, but it was Dred and Harriet Scott, the married couple who were enslaved people who crossed over to free states. And in fact, in a very well-purposed and intentional way, they were set free by their former enslavers. And ultimately, in coming back to the state of Missouri, which was a slave state, by the way, I just need to make another New England connection. We have the Missouri Compromise of 1820. 1820, the Missouri Compromise said that Missouri came into the Union as a slave state, while Maine came into the Union as a free state. I just want you to get the juxtaposition. There was again, Black folk in the midst of politics. All right, keep going, Janet. This picture, by the way, Edward Crawford, along with probably 9 or 10 other young leaders in Ferguson, these young people are now dead. They're now dead. And we are asking questions about how could freedom fighters, this young, these teens and 20-something young people, how within a matter of 4, 5, 6 years, how can 9, 10, 12 of them now, who were leaders back then, now they're dead? Many of us are asking the question, what killed them? And I'm gonna leave it there because that's a conversation for another day. Keep going, Jenny. Here, a wall of authorized authority in riot gear, descending into the neighborhood and the community by which they had been kettled meaning they were blocked in on every side. There was no way of escape. And then the armed officers would press them in. What happens when you are caged or pressed in with your backs against the wall? What happens in that moment? What happens in that time? Keep going, keep going, keep going. Here, it was said that when Mike Brown was shot and killed, he was shot and killed, but he was in a position, the universal hands up position, in surrendering to the police. And so the protest chant was created. Hands up, don't shoot. All right, keep going, keep going, keep going. I can talk Ferguson all night. These are who I call my nieces and nephews. I got a text from one of my close buddies and friends and brothers that Saturday afternoon that said to me, the crib is on fire, ... Ferguson. And then I said, what are you talking about, man? He said, turn on the TV. And I saw these images that you saw. And my wife is from St. Louis, and my children were born in St. Louis. And so St. Louis was very important. And we were back and forth from here in Connecticut to here. Here's my brother, the Reverend Osaji Fuseku. Here you see flanking him in front of protesters and my nieces and nephews who we discovered when we went back home, who I knew some of these young people before they were born because I knew their mamas and their daddies, right? These were literally, I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law that live in Ferguson. I have nieces and nephews of blood and family relations in Ferguson. I also have nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters of kind in Ferguson. These were my people. We got a Reverend Canon in the Episcopal Church, a Presbyterian minister. There's a Jewish rabbi. There's a United Church of Christ minister just off to the side of this, and a sanctified preacher who is an activist and leader, standing in the midst on their knees, hands up, don't shoot, keep going, keep going, keep going. These images out of Ferguson, again, I'm now here we are, and you see yours truly off to one side. We were 1 year later, we were joined with the likes of the Reverend Dr. Cornel West and other celebrities who joined us as there's Bree Newsom there. That's the young lady that went up in South Carolina, went up the flagpole and grabbed that South Carolina state flag that is so meaningful to us and to this movement during that time. Again, here these moments, somewhat contrived, I would say, very contrived. They were not staged, but maybe staged because we were asking the questions, maybe like they were asking the question during the Civil Rights Movement. How will history remember us? How will history document us? Yet they were making these pictures, being seen in these shots, are that literal history of the diaspora, connecting us to freedom works that predate us and yet are right here in our presence. There's a discourse and a conversation with one another that I see in this picture. I see the replacer, the successor of the leader of the Children's Defense Fund in this picture. I see a leader in the United Church of Christ who's now ascended to be a top leader in the church. I see several political leaders, Cori Bush, who will, I believe, in our next election become the new federal representative congresswoman from the state, the first congressional district in the state of Missouri. She replaces the tyranny of a family of Bill and Lacey Clay that had held that one position politically for almost 50 years. One family held one seat in Congress. And now Cori Bush is pictured in this group. Here we are assembled, are ready to take a march for freedom, a march for justice, joining in the chorus of the traditions of our ancestors, our foreparents in the work of justice. One more pick, and then I'm gonna hand it back to my brother. and yours truly in the middle of this scrum. One of the things I find very interesting about this picture, this is in fact my favorite picture. We are here in Ferguson, in the parking lot of the Metropolitan, the municipal building that has the fire department and the police department and government, the government seat for the city of Ferguson. A mythical line had been drawn by the police that said, if you cross this line, we will arrest you. How does that happen in a public space? A parking lot is where we go to park to go do business, right? And yet it becomes the litmus test of the line that if you cross, you somehow are breaking the law. For duly authorized faith leaders who were asking the question, why are you killing us? Mm. Keep going, I keep going, one more. And there we are. I love this picture. This was a day after. First of all, I love this picture because my mama got to see it. My mama got to see her son and standing next to me, my son, her grandson, out on the line for freedom and justice.
Acting up. Got
to see this picture. And you see the byline, More Monday. How you like me now? Mm-hmm. I use this picture because it speaks to what it means to join in this course, to join in this work, to join in a tradition, to join in a trajectory of protest. Many people ask me, why do you protest? What does it really mean? All right. I can tell you what it means. It means that in some way, we're not just affirming ourselves within our words, we're also placing our bodies on the line for what we believe is the truth of our lives in the way that some of our ancestors could not do, in the way that some of our ancestors lost their life, believing that one day their progeny would enter into a freer, more just society. That's why this picture is important to me. That's why protest and arrest are important to me. We're doing the work of justice in a very interesting way. Of course, yours truly, my son, his best bud, several of my colleagues in this picture. I know many of these folk in this picture. We were there in a moment. Didn't know that the Post-Dispatch was going to take this picture, but we're so glad they used it on the front page of the picture because it meant something to my mother.
Mm-hmm. Can we just keep the photo here real quick? Just keep it here until we go to the very last photo in the conversation. And this is something that Bishop and I talked about a little bit about the comparing and contrasting the Black freedom movement period and today's Black Lives Matter movement, and the ways in which the Black Lives Matter movement has been more encompassing of issues around sexuality, sometimes around issues of class and region, in powerful ways, but also being honest and having a reckoning about what might be considered as limits. For all of the contemporary today's self-consciousness about photos and about extremely staged selfies and likes, for all of that, the present politics in certain ways lacks a piece of the Black freedom movement and what was always a haunting question for so many, not everyone, but for so many, the question of how will history remember me? This sense of not just creating a rupture or a break between themselves and the past, which you hear sometimes, the old ways. There was always, and I don't want to romanticize it, but there was a healthy dose of a sense of standing within a tradition, of within a legacy, and again of being for all of the self of the current moment of selfies and camera phones. I would argue that there is actually a lack of contrivance, a lack of intentionality, and I want to bring you to this final picture to have a conversation about why I think this in a certain way. And this will bring in our white brothers and sisters into a discussion of the Black freedom movement in the current moment and how we need to move forward. Only wearing a stocking cap and a face mask. Here we have the image of who was later called Naked Athena. She stands in front of the police in defiance doing yoga poses. Officers shot pepper balls at her feet, and another protester ran out in front of her with a homemade shield, but she sidestepped him and his shield. And 10 minutes later, the officers left, and then she left. She later said that she wanted to insert a very deep feminine place within herself into the space. She wanted to insert a femininity within the space that she says was dominated by police in their quote unquote warrior stance. A warrior stance, she said, that was not earned. She concluded by saying her goal was to show that the Black Lives Matter movement was not violent. So here, her nakedness was moving or working with the intent of allyship. That for her, she said, I like to be naked. It's part of my politics. But this is why we sometimes have to move away from allyship, which I understand as suggesting that this people over here that I want to help have a deficit and I have a surplus and I want to give my surplus to aid those with a deficit, to help them in their situation. So I've argued in other places that we need to move away from an allyship of deficit and surplus and move to a vision of comradeship, that we are all in this together, that helping them by being in service to them in the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, I am saving myself because we are intertwined within an infrastructure of terror and inhumanity, and that in their inhumanity, I am also inhumane. That's something that James Baldwin always said, no relation, but I'll take credit for his profundity. That it's in that understanding that engaging in this act, I'm not saving you, I'm not helping you. Can we go back to the image, please, if it's okay? I'm not saving you, I'm not helping you. I am in this with you. We are comrades. We are in this together. It would shape or alter, I think, the way that she understood herself in this photo. I like to be naked. It's part of my politics. But nakedness is received and has different meaning in different bodies, right? So her nakedness speaks to a history of white women's innocence, sanctity, and importance. That when she steps in front of the line in a city of Portland that's only 6% Black, in a downtown where Black communities have been displaced to the poor suburbs, her presence doesn't have the same resonance. It doesn't have a history. It doesn't have an acknowledgement. It doesn't have enough intentionality. It doesn't have enough contrivance of the history of what she sits in to have the meaning in what she intends. Her nakedness, I like to be naked, is part of my politics. Her politics would have understood that what does it mean where Black women's bodies that have been naked, not physically naked, but naked in their humanity by just saying, I am a human being, I deserve to be protected, have been shot and killed. Breonna Taylor, Rekia Boyd, Sandra Bland. They aren't physically naked, but they're naked in the expectation that their humanity will be recognized, and they die. But here she is in her white, innocent nakedness with the expectation that she will be able to sit there and dance and not only live, but that the police will walk away. The inability to see the comradeship here, that her positionality offers a different kind of power, that her nakedness is different, means more, means valuable. I just want to let us marinate on that as a metaphor for thinking about how we come together across races, across classes, across struggles. What does it mean, therefore, then, to enter into a Black Lives Matter project and to look at not just simply offering your surplus to Black deficit, but literally joining and saying, I will submit myself to Black leadership because it's their freedom, it's their struggle that's going to save us all. So I just want to pass it off I know that Bishop has something to say about that.
This was June 8th, 2015. The reason I wanted to show this, it was, I think, documented the first Black Lives Matter rally and protest in the state of Connecticut. I, along with my beloved Pamela and Maura Mundy CT, organized. At this point, we may have been about 25 or 30 across that. At one point, there were almost 100. And they were giving us the warning, it's time to get out of there or we're going to arrest you. That day, 17 of us took an arrest for Black Lives Matter. Dr. Baldwin raised this question. What does it mean to be in a movement with Black people leading it? What does it mean when Black people take a stand and have voice and have agency? We've always had agency, we've always had voice, but it didn't necessarily get recognized or registered as a valid voice. And yet in this moment, Black Lives Matter, which was a hashtag in a conversation between 3 Black women, 2 of them same gender loving, in response to the non-conviction of George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin incident, to become what we now say the movement of Black Lives, or Black Lives Matter and its movements. All right, that took on legs and feet and started to become a thing, and as we understand it, in Ferguson. Here we were now again stepping ourselves back into the same space and place. We were white and Black. We were of religious persuasion and others. There, if you see, there are 2 people that are kneeling down. Those are 2 white brothers from the Catholic worker movement. Dorothy Day. If I had time, I would juxtaposition a picture of Dorothy Day and a sister by the name of Alicia, who was a freedom fighter. Dorothy Day working with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement back in the 1970s, the early 1970s. And Alicia, who just got off of work and heard that there was a protest in and around Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, who had been killed for selling some Lucy's out in the front in Baton Rouge. Another spot where Black Lives Matter took hold and protests and armed force rebellion struck out. These are moments in this tradition. And I would say in my closing word that we have an opportunity to recover for white folk one's humanity for real. If we can understand that our existence is tied to this existence. Dr. King said it, he said it better than anybody else could have ever said. I couldn't stay home in Atlanta and know, I'm paraphrasing, know that my brothers and sisters are struggling in Birmingham. So in his letter from Birmingham jail, he said, we are tied together in a single garment of destiny, all right? Right? I can't be free. None of us, in fact, are free until all of us are free because of this tied together, this garment of destiny. That, for me, is Black Lives Matter, in part.
Thank y'all. Let's open it up for questions or conversation.
I just want to thank you both, gentlemen. You leading us tonight in your words and these pictures is very powerful. It means a lot to me, so thank you.
As I view your presentation, I ask myself, how do we address the phrase all lives matter when Black Lives Matter is the message we want to deliver? If either of you want to take that.
Go ahead, Bishop.
Well, I'll say this. If all lives matter, then it ought to act like it. Simply said.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate real quickly and just say that, of course, all lives matter. But I mean, you know, people have said this in different ways in social media, et cetera. If we were going on a cancer walk and people was like, you know, had ribbons for cancer, would we say, well, what about leukemia, right? Or if somebody's house was on fire and the police and the fire department was there putting it out, would we say, what about my house over here? It's not on fire. What about my house? Don't all houses matter? I I think we put this in different contexts. It just shows the lucridity of that argument. It's another way of just ignoring the unequal deficits that we endure in our American society and history. We continually be haunted by this notion that equality means that we are all starting from the same place. But you know, as Ta-Nehisi Coates said in his piece, The Case for Reparations, if you have stabbed me 16 times in my back, we are not equal, or everything's not all good just simply because you pulled the knife out. There's a debt to be paid, a repair for those 16 knife wounds. And so that's how I respond to All Lives Matter.
Thank you. So actually, Professor Manovitz has a question. If you want, I can read them, or if you want to just read them and respond, it might save some time. But this one is directed to Professor Baldwin. And I don't know if you want to just jump in and answer it.
Sure. So the question, just to summarize, is about this, the claim or the issue that we raised about contrivance, and asking if I could say more about who the audience has been for these images over time. Has it remained the same? Has it been consistent? Has it changed? Especially considering this, our Instagram era. And I think that Professor Manovitz, he actually answers the question better than I could, that yes, the audiences change over time. And I think that we do see a current moment. There are moments in time, but it's in this current moment, you actually see a frustration with what I call white irrelevance. And what I mean by that is these images that are created by Black people and brown people for Black and brown people. This came up actually, this is maybe some young people, was before their time. This came up with the controversy around Dave Chappelle and the Chappelle Show, where he was presenting all the extremely controversial and provocative comedy for an audience of multiracial New Yorkers that presumed Black humanity. So you could offer a parody of Black people if you presume Black humanity. But if you believe that the parodies of Black people were actually true representations, it became a problem. And so then when white folks that were not a part of this community start, as he said, laughing the wrong way, he had to leave. And so there's this moment where there was a community of understanding based on the assumption of Black humanity that was breached when this different audience came into play that saw these parodies of Blackness as factual representations of Blackness. And so in the current moment, you see another kind of frustration with white, built around white irrelevance, where you have Black and brown images for Black and brown audiences with shorthands, with shortcuts, with code language, with insider discourse that people are frustrated about. And you get the response that we talked about earlier. Don't all lives matter? Is that reverse discrimination? What about us? You're being racist. So we see this happening again. So that's what I would say to Professor Manovitz's question.
Yeah, and let me add to that and couple in that next. There's a series of questions reiterating or reframing the. I don't like that phrase, "all lives matter," and there's a reason why. I find it offensive when, in fact, the phrase Black Lives Matter is an affirmation. It is a singular phrase, 3 words that assumes my humanity, right? It is an affirmation. It is a statement of fact. Black lives, which means to say, for me, my life matters. Not only does my life matter to my mother and to my spouse, my beloved, and my children, but it also matters to the community I come from. But not only that, the community I now serve, the community I am now situated in, it has resonance with all there is, in fact, because I just don't come from one particular place. I have multiple places I come from, right? And so how can that then be reduced or in some way reduced to a caricature of itself? And I think that's what you were referencing, Professor Baldwin, that there is a deep deepness to the hashtag that is now a movement, Black Lives Matter. For me to engage in a trite, and I don't mean to be offensive, but it is trite to say all lives matter. And every time somebody says that, they have an attitude and they yelling. They mad. It's like something wrong with them, right? When in fact, we just ripped through for almost 400 years of history that really justifies that Black people should all be mad, should all have an attitude for the way they've been treated in the country that they built.
I want to add to what Bishop is saying and just elaborate just a little bit, not on him, but what he's inspired in me to say, in the sense that the fact that it took us to be stuck in quarantine and forced to watch Officer Chauvin keep his knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd for 8 minutes and 40 some seconds. And for that to be the prick of conscience, say, oh, we got a problem. While there had just been dozens of Black people killed and dying in the same similar way. So the fact that it took that, and the fact that in those other circumstances, you had white folks, let's be clear, or folks saying, well, what did he do? I'm sure we didn't get all the story. Well, if you just comply, well, he looked a little aggressive. He shouldn't have moved his hands. The fact that those are your responses, or don't all lives matter? The fact that those are your responses confirms the degree to which all lives matter as a chant signifies those people as zombies, as the walking dead. And so therefore, to say that Black lives matter, when you say that, you are saving yourself. You are resurrecting yourself. You are bringing yourself out of an institutional and an inherited trauma that allows you to be callous in the face of Black death and see nothing wrong. You're dead. You are dead if you see that and say nothing. And so to say Black lives matter is your resurrection. You understand what I'm saying? That's real. And to say all lives matter is another nail in the coffin.
That's amazing. That's great. Do you want to answer the next question? I also have a question which I put up, which is about the role of art, which you alluded to in your talk and in articles that you've written. You discussed the Picasso, which served as the backdrop to the student protest in Chicago in 1968, and compared it to the Situationists. And do you think art was used differently in the US? I mean, the answer is probably yes, but then maybe how, I think today that maybe in some protest movements, art isn't seen to have the same sense of urgency that it might in Europe, and it's not as culturally ingrained. So it might not be used as a tool as often. Or was it maybe the beginning of a way of questioning these dominant white-driven art historical narratives in 1968 and trying to open up the field of art a bit more?
Yeah, I think that the Situationist International got grabbed and got elevated into an abstracted avant-garde phenomena over time. But if we go back to the roots of the Situationist International, I was able to recover this fascinating article that I was able to translate. And most of us don't know that the origins of the Situationist International, their inspiration for the idea of creating situations as moments of disrupting the mundane in everyday life, in physical space, their inspiration was Watts, 1965.
All right.
That they say that. And then to have the citywide protests in Paris in 68 happening at the same time as this image that we have before, the image that we had before you in Chicago. And for Maseko Myers to say, we were creating stunts, creating situations. That's a direct quote, right? The transatlantic cross-fertilization of sentiments. And we tend to, when we look at Black critical work, Black grassroots work in the academy and in the art world, we always try to find white antecedents or white precedents. Well, this was influenced by Hopper, Archibald Motley, or this was influenced by, the Ashcan School or what have you. But what does it mean to understand that the Situations International was inspired by Watts? What does it mean to say that both niggas on the South Side and students in Paris were both creating situations? Right? How can we reorient our notions of tracing genealogies if we offer a more robust understanding of, yes, Black Lives Matter in now and in the archive? What does it mean to think about a grounded avant-gardism, a politicized, a situated avant-gardism, an abstracted art practice that's grounded in social movements? That's what it was. That crossed the Atlantic, inspired by Black folk. So I'll stop there.
I'm gonna keep going just for a second, because this has modern day currency. We were a part of a small delegation in 2016 that was invited to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We went down there thinking we were there just to be guests, invited guests. Come to find out, we were gonna just kind of see what was going on down there. We come to find out that we were inviting guests into a whole month of activity. They call it Black July, where artists and activists and protests and conversations within the academy, and Candomblé and Capoeira were in conversation with Christians and other indigenous rooted traditions. They were doing art on the display. They were practicing. Many people don't know Candomblé is an art form today, right? But it was actually used as real defense, right? Oh, Capoeira, I'm sorry, not Candomblé. Candomblé is the religious or the spiritual tradition, Candomblé. And so we were there in 2016, and then I was driving my car, listening to NPR like usual, and then there was a report saying that there was a new movement in Brazil, being translated, called Favela Lives Matter, and that they got their inspiration from a group of Black Lives Matter activists who had come to visit a year earlier. And I saw the connection. You want to talk about the global context of this movement. I think you're right on, Brother Baldwin. It happens today, just like that. That Black Lives Matter is not just a conversation we're having here, but it is a global conversation that we're having in relationship to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There is happening right there. It's happening right now in Kinshasa, in Central Africa. It's happening in Rio de Janeiro. It's happening in New Zealand, in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Yeah. And in India, the elite lives matter.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question for both responses. We have a question that I missed, and then I think if anybody has any other questions, type them in quickly, because we'll probably end soon so that everybody can go eat dinner, whatever people do. Do you see a connection between the Fugitive Slave Act and the drive to deport immigrants in this country? We might consider that people who come to this country might be escaping a reality where people are paid $2 a day. So I don't know if either of you have a response to that.
I'm not quite sure. This is Mr. Halpern. What insight is being invoked here? But from reading the question, there is no question that European immigrants were escaping tyranny. There's no question about that. And that's something that should be recognized in relationship to European conditions. But that can't be discussed outside of the context of what does it mean for poor whites to come to this country and to still be positioned in a situation that is greater than being not bonded, not being enslaved. And that's not to I guess hierarchicalize victims, if you will, but to what degree when we think about a place like Missouri, right? And the discussion we talked about earlier in history, in historical context in the 1850s, the questions about whether it being a slave state or a free state, you had white working class folk who were saying that it should be a free state because we don't want to compete with Black free labor, right? So these histories intersect, and not always for altruistic reasons, right? They weren't necessarily opponents of slavery, but they were opponents of the competition in the marketplace. Or we can look in places like Boston, where we have the wonderful stories about, not the wonderful story, but the horrific stories about Irish Americans coming here and it's saying, no, no Irish, no Blacks and no dogs allowed. But as we move forward, those individuals were eventually allowed to move to West Roxbury and move out of Southie. Whereas African Americans and others were still constrained to Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, and still are. And so these different vectors of experience and inequality, they should be acknowledged on their own terms, but at the same time, they are different. They're connected and different. And they feed on one another. So I'm not sure what the direct connection is between the Fugitive Slave Act and the deportation of immigrants, but I'm sure there are many. Bishop.
Yeah, just one clear comment. In 1857, in the landmark court decision, the Dred Scott decision, Chief Justice Roger Taney said this in his majority opinion. He said that Black people had no rights that white people were bound to respect. That set, that concertized with legal precedent, right? That codified a practice of being that was already there, right? So the Fugitive Slave Act had meaning through the courts. You want to know, then we get to, by that time, we have the Civil War, we get the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment that we's free now, right? Allegedly. And yet within 10 years, Reconstruction ends. It ends because we had an election of a president that got decided by people in the back room and this electoral college. 20 years later, we get Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, that then reintroduces the Supreme Court and legal precedent that said we have accommodation, separate but equal. Mm-hmm. When we lived separate, nowhere near equal. Mm-hmm. That then we had to do a whole nother Civil Rights Act. We had to do a Civil Rights Act in 64 and the Voting Rights Act in 65. We can't get this voting thing together. Everybody, every 150 to 100 years, we got to revisit Black people and votes. I'm just suggesting to you what you just said, Professor Baldwin. There is some commonality, right? Right. But there's also, there's a trajectory here that can't be denied, mm-hmm. that has its own particularity.
Yes. That
when you speak of it, like we're speaking of it here, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, aren't there other people involved in it? Can't we take, without being able to sit with, it's one thing that in America, in the United States of America, white folk can't sit in this Blackness too long, mm-hmm. without wanting to squirm up out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's very clear. For example, with what you got the radical right folks in the streets talking about, because they got to wear masks, jacking the slogan, "I can't breathe." How dare you? Talk about contrivance of white supremacy and the callousness. So a slogan that's used to commemorate the death of Black people at the hands of state violence, and you are being inconvenienced by having to wear a mask, and your response is, "I can't breathe." Talk about the continuance of inhumanity within yourself.
Right.
That narrative I said of that zombification of your existence, that you can be walking dead, that you can have the audacity to take a slogan like "I can't breathe" and talk about it because of your momentary inconvenience. So in a way, it's powerful to understand the degree to which Black people have continually been the canary in the coal mine for policies and conditions that will affect us all. So it was 10 years ago when Bishop and Reverend Barber were talking about the corruption of these voting rights acts. And what do we have now? For the nation, they saying, nah, y'all can't vote by mail. But when it was happening to Black folks, well, it must be Black behavior. It must be corruption. It must be Latino corruption in California. Non-residents are voting. It's some kind of culture of poverty. It's some kind of culture of corruption. And now what you got? When you turn your backs on us, what happened? Now the foot is on your neck. That's what happens. That's why saying Black Lives Matter is a salvation for us all. Wake up.
That's a great point. I mean, it's amazing to think when you bring up the victimization that comes along on the other side in order to claim some kind of to undo the protest actually that Black Lives Matter is trying to affect. And so I actually promised that we would have that we would allow one more question. And I think this is a very interesting one. Could you comment on the role of TV in the civil rights movement and then the Black Lives Matter movement today?
Sure. Let me jump in, and then Doc, you clean this up for me. Now, one of the things that was very clear and very understood within the context of the modern day civil rights movement, now I'm talking about the 1950s and 1960s, it was very clear that it took Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it is, October 7th, 1963. It was him, because you remember it wasn't but 3 networks, right? We didn't have cable. Wasn't but 3 networks, and it was the nightly news and then your local news. And it was those cameras that were running in Birmingham that you saw the hoses set out, right? Set against Black people, and the dogs set against, and the children who were arrested day after day after day, telling that story that then twisted the arm of then President and Attorney General Kennedy's to send federal troops who weren't there to put down the protests, but they were there to protect the protesters. My God, my God. We were talking about Portland, and now we have a government that sends federal officers to put down the protests, turning arms on its own citizenry who are there exhibiting the very right we hold up as revolutionary. Right? And what I like about what happened in Ferguson, for example, you would have never heard about what happened to Mike Brown had it not been for my nieces and nephews who took to Twitter and Facebook, who lifted up, there's something going down here, and we're not coming out the street until we get justice for Mike Brown. Hands up, don't shoot, was their cry, right? That's how we got Anderson, Cooper in Ferguson, and and Don Lemon at Ferguson, and all them folk ducking all the stuff that was happening. They got tear gas just like the rest of it. We got a book right now. One of the reporters from the Washington Post got gassed and arrested, just like the rest of us did. So the media, and I want to say television, but the media in particular, played both a role in the modern day civil rights movement and plays a similar role in telling the narrative. But I also want to hesitate, because what I am pleased about is we didn't wait. My nieces and nephews and those of us who are now engaged in the work, we don't wait for the story to be told about us. We tell our own story.
I think that the use of media and television has been a mixed bag. I think to go back to what Bishop Selders pointed out is that in the modern civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, there was still a belief in the official news media outlets as serving as the official record, as being truth conveyors. And so when we saw dogs and hoses being pointed towards Black people, it became a truth, right? It required a confrontation with this visual reckoning. White supremacy learned from that. And we can flash forward to 1992 with Rodney King and the use of video saying, aha, we got him on camcorders, right? And then white supremacy response was, let's slow the tape down and let's look at how many hits, which hit hurt. If we can't isolate which hit, then none of them matter. And we're gonna slow the tape down and reinterpret the media imagery to say that Rodney King he was high on PCP, and we had to beat him to near death because of the possibility of his bestiality coming out. And then we fast forward, right, to Trayvon Martin. Again, another feedback loop, white supremacy again adjusting itself and saying that when Trayvon Martin defended himself, he had a weapon, which was the concrete that he bashed George Zimmerman's head against to defend himself because George Zimmerman was being a vigilante terrorist, following him around, and he had a Arizona tea and Skittles. So when Trayvon defended himself, the court argued that he had a weapon in his hand, meaning the concrete, okay? Are you getting what I'm saying? So then we move forward, and then we have Donald Trump learning from all this and saying that, okay, as I put out misinformation, I'm gonna say the mainstream media is fake news. At the same time that I put out fake news, I'm gonna say the media is putting out fake news. So that if there's any images that we see, we can immediately discount. Even if it pricks our heart and our consciousness, that's fake news. What happened before? So in one level, it's amazing that camera phones can be anywhere. Anyone can hold them, but they enter into a sea of interpretation. So the response to seeing Black death is that, well, what did the Black person do? Well, how was the image cut? What happened before the camera came on? Even when you're seeing death in your face, the response, the media, the learned logic of media interpretation is there must be something more in the face of Black death. There must be some other image that's being suppressed to pull the race card that will redeem white inhumanity. And so on one level, while current day social media offers a number of avenues to tell the story, it's being confronted with new interpretations or new responses of terror. It remains a battlefield. More images don't necessarily mean more truth or more power. It's a new battlefield that requires literate activists that are able to wage war on that realm. I think about my man Harry Allen from Public Enemy in the 1980s. He called himself a media assassin. We need more media assassins on the streets that can do the analysis. I'm putting a plug in for what we do in the academy. We need the media analysts to join the front lines to battle the terror line of fake news. So I'm gonna stop there.
Bishop Selders, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, I don't have nothing to say. That man preaching to me.